Okay, so we are going to look at the sugya of tefillah b'tzibur. So this will be a little different than the topics that we've covered the last couple of weeks, which are more, I'd say, less familiar to us, and this will be hopefully a little more familiar. Definitely be more relevant day to day in our lives. These are sugyas that I worked on at the beginning of Corona when we couldn't daven with a minyan. Um, so this is trying to understand what exactly we were losing by not davening with a minyan. That was the goal here. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is this is like really two parts, but they're separate shiurim altogether. There's really like three or four parts, but I don't think part three or four is really good to give shiur on. The first part is going to be the nature of tefillah b'tzibur. What is tefillah b'tzibur? Okay, so let's look at it. It's interesting is that we're going to have to cross some lines into philosophy in order to understand the halacha. So generally, we tend to stay away from philosophy, but here we're going to have to cross a little into it and then step away from it. So let's see some of the sources here. I sent out the introductory shiur, so hopefully you got a chance to see that. But the first source that we have is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has there's no relevance of any physicality to Hashem. So generally, when we talk about that, we generally mean that Hashem doesn't have a body, that there's no physical form to God. He doesn't have a hand, he doesn't have an arm, things like that nature. But there's also what the Rambam calls ma'oros hagufos, which are parts of consequences or ramifications of having a body. That there's other aspects of being physical that lend to other things. One of the ideas of being physical is that you're shaykh to time. Time is something that you're part of, like you relate to time. And that's not really true of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Hakadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have this idea of time. So that's something to keep in mind, that there's no you'll see it a lot throughout the Torah. We're going to see it here, which is going to lead to our question. But there's no real idea of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. You're saying that there's a time to pray to God. There's a time that's best to approach God. That's not really relevant when it comes to God. So the whole idea of the fact that there might be a time is going to be confusing to us. Okay, that shouldn't be. So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to see here is this Rambam that says that God there's no aspect of time when it comes to God. Okay, the Gemara is going to bring up a couple of psukim here that we're going to see this Gemara. And they center around this idea of an ace ratzon. Okay, so if you look at the source here, it's the source number 2. It says, "Vanit filasilecha Hashem ace ratzon el kimbarav chastecha neni b'mesishecha." Right, that there's this idea. Ibn Ezra says that mispalel ulayim ace ratzon. I'm going to daven now because maybe I'll find this like time of that I could approach God, successfully. It's a time that God is ready to be appeased, an ace ratzon. That's the Ibn Ezra. The Radak says, "Klomar ani tefillah silacha tamid ulai yachas me'aitos ace ratzon li shetakabel tefillah silah tzeni min hagos." David Melch doesn't know when the best time, when this ace ratzon is, when this special time in front of God is. And so he davens all the time. He hopes to get lucky. Maybe one of these times that I daven, that'll be the ace ratzon, and then I win. Right? Then God accepts my prayers because it's at this time. You have right, so Rashi here on this pasuk in Yeshayahu here in source number 6. He says, "Beis ratzon, beis tefillah shatam misratzam beis lefanai." Right, so it's like when the Jewish people are in God's favor, right? And the Radak says, "Komar Hashem beis ratzon yomar hakel Yisrael." God says to the Jewish people, "Beis shetaseh ratzoni, when you do my will, ani anisecha bezakecha. Then I'm going to answer you when you call out, Elai mitzara in ba'elecha." Right, that's his idea of this ace ratzon. Okay, so from the Ibn Ezra and the Radak here in source number 3 and number 4, it seems that the ace ratzon is a time when tefillos are answered. Okay, actually it seems like time that the Jews are in God's doing stuff to earn God's favor. Okay, so let's see how these psukim play themselves out in this Gemara. Right, so in the introductory shiur we went through the pshat of the Gemara. Okay, and the Gemara talks about these ace ratzon that the congregation, when the tzibbur davens to Hashem, That's right. So it says Emasai Eis Ratzon. The Gemara asks, B'shashat tzibbur mispalin, at the time that the tzibbur is davening. That's when the Eis Ratzon is. Okay, so now we know, right? It seems to be that the best time to pray is at an Eis Ratzon. I want to know what time is the Eis Ratzon. So the time, it turns out it's not a time on the clock. It turns out it's when the tzibbur is davening together, right? That's when the tzibbur davens together. That's the time that there's an Eis Ratzon. Okay. So right, so he says, Rabbi Yossi Rechanina mehacha kol Hashem beis ratzon inisecha. He says, Hein al kavi ever lo you must, and tefillah is not rejected at that time, right? So which means the Gemara has these two ideas: idea of when tefillah is accepted and when tefillah is not rejected, which leads to our next questions. Okay, the first question we have is what's an Eis Ratzon, right? That's what we're trying to define what an Eis Ratzon is, because it seems like that's our goal. Our goal is to pray at an Eis Ratzon. So what is an Eis Ratzon? How do we define what an Eis Ratzon is? And again, this is where we say that we're gonna have to like delve a little into philosophy to understand the nature of this halacha, to understand what an Eis Ratzon is. And then how is it that that this opinion here of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Shimon Bar Yochai, that he says that an Eis Ratzon is b'shashat tzibbur mispalim, at the time that the tzibbur is mispalel. How does that qualify as an Eis Ratzon? What does that mean, right? And so we don't know what an Eis Ratzon is, so we have no idea of knowing how the davening with the tzibbur could qualify it as davening with as the Eis Ratzon. But something about the Eis Ratzon is when the congregation is praying, that does something that makes this as an Eis Ratzon. Okay, and then we want to know what the difference is between accepting prayer, having our prayers accepted, and not having our prayers rejected. Are those one and the same things? Are those two different things? Right, that's and what are we aiming for when it comes to the Eis Ratzon? Which one of those? Okay, we saw this idea of the Gra, right? The Gra says lo yitachin, right? He asks our question: Shakadosh Baruch Hu Eis Ratzon, demashma shatayim mishtanim. It doesn't make, you can't say that God has time, right? It doesn't make any sense. This obviously has nothing to do with time. Ela kol talui bana, right? Everything depends on us. Right, that's how we understand. Whenever anything anthropomorphic is given about God, so the easiest methodological move to handle that is to switch it out on us. It's not about God; it's about us, and it's a lesson about us. So that's clearly the Gra says that's what's happening. Right. So by the time we do a mitzvah, that's the Eis Ratzon. Okay, so that's right. So vadahi beis tefila shatzivur mispal v'osim mitzvah bekanfel. So there's when the tzibur is davening, right? So that's obviously when they're doing a mitzvah together. Right, and that's why it's an Eis Ratzon. Okay, makes sense, right? But it'll also be an Eis Ratzon when like the tzibur shaking lulav together, right, or anything else, right? What's the phenomena that's happening here? Okay, okay. So and then if this really is about us and it has nothing to do with God, right? The Eis Ratzon has nothing to do with God. It's really about us. Right, it is like take away this whole thing that we saw in the first Gemara with David HaMelech is trying to figure out when the Eis Ratzon is. Take that out of your mind, forget it. That was leading us in the wrong direction, says the Gemara. That's leading you to think that the Eis Ratzon is about Hashem. We're trying to find out when Hashem's Eis Ratzon is. Forget that. That's not what's happening here. Rather, it's our Eis Ratzon. Okay, fine. So then, what is the Eis Ratzon and what brings it on? Right, so and right, that's got to be the question, right? Again, we're trying to aim, but for some reason, we're trying to get this Eis Ratzon. So if we're trying to get this Eis Ratzon, yeah, go ahead, John.
Can there be more than one Eis Ratzon, meaning a moment in time versus a creation of a window?
Oh, you're saying not how many times a day, but you're saying can there be multiple different types of Eis Ratzons?
Yeah, one is the time of the day that God has created that David HaMelech is looking for, and one is when more than 10 men get together, it creates an Eis Ratzon.
Yeah, so it would seem like that's definitely possible, except for the fact that Gra says lo yitachin. You couldn't have. It's not that you couldn't have multiple things that bring on an Eis Ratzon, but the Gra says you can't consider the fact it's impossible that God has these special times, because God doesn't relate to time. So it's impossible to say that at different times in the day that
But you could say that God, the same way he creates night and day, that there is no night and day for God, that he creates a special time for man.
Right, you could say it, right? Right. So then, but then it's not an Eis Ratzon, right? Then it's our Eis, right? Then it's not an Eis that's that God is like it's a time when God is willing to listen. Then it's like times that we're able to pray, I would say. So you could say that. You could definitely say that. That's definitely possible to say. What the Gra is saying you can't say is that Eitzel Kadosh Baruch Hu Eis Ratzon, right? That like God there's an Eis Ratzon. That's impossible, right? That's
Right.
in other words.
That just seems like semantics to me, that we're keep saying anything, of course, anthropomorphized by God is for us. So an Eitz Ratzon that God would create for us, like on Yom Kippur or something like that, isn't a specific change to God of when he's willing to accept our prayer. It's a moment in time that the gate is open for us, not for God, versus 10 men getting together and creating that Eitz Ratzon on their own that didn't exist previous from God's kind of structure.
Right. So I'm going to go definitely like as the Gra does in the direction of your second choice. But I would say that even in the first choice, right? I think this is what you're trying to focus on. Even in the first choice, even if we would say that, no, this is like times that God puts on the, let's say it's the times of Tefila, right? So like the first 4 or 5 hours of the day, right? That's an Eitz Ratzon because that's the time of Shacharis. Right, so you'd say that, and then therefore it's not about God; it's about God setting aside times for us. But even so, you're going to have to ask, what's the nature of those times? How did those times become an Eitz Ratzon, or how do those times operate as an Eitz Ratzon, right? And then you're going to have to explain that well, and ask why those are an Eitz Ratzon. So it wouldn't be a comprehensive answer; you'd have to explain it. But we're definitely not going to go in that direction anyway. Okay.
Shocked.
Well, yeah. So okay. So then also you have to ask like this. What about like praying with a tzibbur as opposed to praying as an individual creates the Eitz Ratzon? Right? In other words, well, what's so special about davening with a tzibbur? Right? Who cares? Right? It's the same thing. When I pray with a tzibbur, I pray by myself. It's the same activity when it comes to prayer. Yeah, we add things into davening when we daven with a minyan, but that's post facto. In other words, right? That's what we say. There's certain prayers you can't say minyan. Okay, fine. But that's not what we're talking about here when we talk about prayer. We're not talking about Kedusha. We're not talking about Baruch Hu, right? When we talk about prayer, we're talking about our Shemon Esrei. My Shemon Esrei when I'm davening with the tzibbur, and my Shemon Esrei when I'm davening with the Yachid, as myself, is the exact same Shemon Esrei. The prayer is no different. The things around the prayer might be different, but that's not prayer. That's important to note, right? So what's the difference if I'm standing around with 9 other men or I'm davening by myself? The words I say, the kavanah I have, every single thing is still exactly the same, right? So what are the 9 other people standing around me? What does that add to my prayer? That it makes it this Eitz Ratzon, that it makes it so much better.
So it's definitely not exactly the same.
I don't know why.
Well, number one, for sometimes it's easier to have kavanah on your own, but when you're around other people, you're going to be less potentially involved with yourself. You're thinking about other people around you. It becomes a communal thing. It's not just about me. It's about us.
Well, yeah, except for the fact. Okay, so look, I'll tell you, like, on the practical side, we're not looking for a practical answer. So that's in terms of your first approach. And in terms of the second approach, that the tefillah is already written b'lashon rabim. It's already written in plural, if you notice, right? So we already have that aspect that I'm not worried about myself. I don't need other people around me. And truth be told, if I'm focused, I shouldn't be looking at the people around me. I shouldn't even notice that they're there. So like whatever bump I'm gonna get from the fact that there's people around me, be like, well, that guy's got a really tough life. I should really pray for him a little harder. I shouldn't even notice that guy's there. I should be focused on the prayers that I'm saying. Okay, so that's a question that we have. Okay. Then the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, Menash Hargis Yishayahu Amarava Midan Dinar Katle Amarle Maiserach Kamikash Ken or love, right? So Darshu Shem Bimatse, right? Darshu Shem Bimatse Habi Yachid Habi Tzibbur, right? So there's a time that we search for God, right? So he says Elo Sariyom, right? So whenever we search for God, when we search for God in the minyan, we always find him, right? God is always close to us when we're with a minyan when it comes to a search for God for tshuva. Okay, we've got these psukim we're about to see in this Gemara. We went through these psukim on the thing on the introductory shiur. Okay, so here's where we're gonna get to some real meat here. Okay, Amar Rabami ain't feel so shadam nishmas el inke masim nasho bakapo. Right, a person's feels aren't answered unless he prays with like his whole soul. right? He puts like everything into it. Okay. So Shnemar Nasal Avenu Al Kapai Aveni. Is that really true? Ha'okim Shmu Amar Alai V'Dar Sheftehu B'Fiyam V'Shonam Yachazvu Lo V'Libam Lo Nachon Imo V'Lo Neman Over Riso. You don't really need to have that much kavana. So Afa Pichein V'Hu Rachim Yichaper Lo Kasher Kam B'Yachid Kam Tzibur. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says you don't need to have that much kavana. That's not so important. So you say, what do you mean it's not so important to have kavana? It says, no, you don't need to have kavana. When don't you need to have kavana? Like this amount of putting your whole soul into it. When you're the tzibbur, when you're with the tzibbur, you don't need that much. When you a yachid, really needs that extra push. Okay, so just the basics. Our question is, why does sincerity have to matter to the success of tefillah? What role does sincerity play? It's an obvious sort of question, but it's got to be asked. And how now? And this is our real important question here. How is it that when we're davening with a tzibbur, right? When we're davening with a tzibbur, how is it that the sincerity is not a mitigating factor anymore, right? In other words, if you tell me that sincerity is important, then sincerity is important. If you tell me that sincerity is not important, then it's not important. But how could it be that sincerity is only important if I'm by myself? But if there's 9 other people with me, then the sincerity in my tefillah is not that important. How's that possible? Right? That's the right. It's something's missing in that formulation. Okay. You someone want to say something? No. Okay. Okay. So Rabbi Zucker, this is my Rabbi Zucker. He says as follows. He says, "Perish davar shekol zman." And Daniel, if you remember, you were in this year here when he did this. Okay, it's like years ago, but okay. It says, "Perish davar shekol zman shebnei Yisrael mispalim nishmas tefilasan be'eza ofan." B'nei shetfilasan afilu im mikelkeles have a me'en v'yiskiru kel kim tzuram v'kel yon golam. Okay, important pasuk here. Okay, there's a pasuk v'yiskiru. You see it here. He brings it here. V'yiskiru kel kim. Is it one of the pasukim from the Gemara? Hold on. Yeah, here. I'll show you. Here we go. Look at the pasuk even easier here. Okay, here it is, number 15. Okay, v'yiskiru kel kim tzuram v'kel yon golam. Okay. So we're remembered, right? Remember that Hashem is like our tzur, our rock. Okay, that's the pasuk. Okay, so that is going to be. Sorry, I went the wrong way. That's going to be the basis of tefillah, but tzibbur. Okay, so it says shekeponim b'nei Yisrael Hashem. When b'nei Yisrael turns to Hashem, yesh tikva, they have hope. Umishum kach po'elas hashgacha pratis hamiyuchada shel b'nei Yisrael, and therefore, because of this idea of Yeskirel Kilkim Tzuram, right? This idea of this pasuk is what's going to give Bnei Israel the providential success in their prayers whenever they turn to Him. Okay, so and it's the idea that they're putting their hopes into God. Okay, that the tzibbur together, when they come together, they put their hopes into God. It's not a full explanation, right? We have to explain it. Okay, and the Rambam goes into great detail here. He says that tefillah with tzibbur is always listened to, even if there are sinners in the tzibbur, right? Because you would think if I'm sitting next to a murderer and I'm praying, right? So that guy's not helping my case, right? I'm going in front of God and saying, please have mercy on me. And then this huge sinner standing next to me, God's going to, it would seem the idea of how prayer works, right? Is that prayer works. I'm trying to appease God, right? Especially now that we call it Radzon. So I'm trying to appease God. So what do I say? I say, okay, look, I'm trying my best here. But then I've got like the Yossi the murderer next to me, right? So now that I've got Yossi the murderer next to me, so how's my prayer going to be effective if Yossi the murderer is standing next to me? That doesn't look good, right? So that doesn't, right? So but the Rambam says no. I feel how you've been chatayim and Kosh Baruch Hu mois v'tfilas shel Rabbim. Kosh Baruch Hu doesn't reject the tefillah of the Rabbim. Lefichach, therefore, seemingly saying, right, that since Hashem doesn't reject the tefillah of the Rabbim, tzarich adam l'shatef atzon ima tzibur. A person has to connect with the tzibur. V'lo yispal b'yachid kol zman sheyachol yispal mitzibur. He shouldn't pray, right? Anytime he can pray by himself, he shouldn't. Anytime he can pray with the tzibur, he shouldn't pray by himself. Okay, and then a person should get up to go to the Beit Knesset because in a shul, the davening is also listened to. Okay.
So,
okay.
Rabbi, just quickly, if someone's a Russia, can they count for a minyan?
Yeah. I mean, there's like a kofar now. Yeah, but Russia, yeah. Okay.
So a murderer, yes. A kofar, no.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay, for another time. Okay, so Okay, so then Rabbi Zucker says again. He says kavanas nishmas kaim. What does it mean that the tefillah is listened to? Right, the Rambam says that tefillah tzibbur is always listened to. So what does that mean, listened to? When we talk about tefillah being listened to, what does that mean? Right. So he says, "Kan hi aniyaso yisalo itzakas atzoik l'mal shalosenu." Right. It's right. There's a number of ways, right? So that that tefillah tzibur is that Hashem doesn't turn away from the tzibur. Okay, he doesn't turn away from it. He's going to listen. He's going to pay attention to that tefillah. Okay, so so that's one way of understanding right. One way of looking at this Rambam, and one point that the Rambam makes. Okay, so then we would ask the question again. Why is it that a lack of sincerity isn't a mitigating factor here? Right? Ask that question again. Okay, and then the Rambam said, right? The Rambam had said, we go back here. The Rambam said that the tefillah is never moes b'tfilas on sharabim. Ain't a Kosh Baruch Hu moes b'tfilas on sharabim. Kosh Baruch Hu never rejects the tefillah of the rabbim, which seems, if you remember, that was our third question of how could it, right? Is there a difference between Hashem listening to tefillah and not rejecting tefillah? Okay, and now the question is like this. When the Rambam says tzarich adam l'shatef atzmo im hatzibur, that a person must, what's the language must? We have a couple of like words that we understand. Chayav, right? We have I don't know what else we have. We have other things that are reshus. But what's tzarich? What does it mean tzarich? What's the idea of tzarich? Okay. So does that mean that there's a chiyuv of davening with a minyan? Right? Do I have it? Is there an actual chiyuv to, according to the Rambam? Right? Other people have opinions, but according to the Rambam, is the obligation to daven with a minyan. Okay. And the Rambam says that a person should get up early to go to shul, right? Because prayers aren't guaranteed to be listened to unless they're in a shul. So so is it the tzibbur or the shul that, right? That's got to be our question, right? And could it be that we would say that the prayers in the synagogue are the prayers in the tzibbur? Are they one and the same? Are they synonymous things? Okay. So right. So is davening with a minyan outside of shul considered tefillah b'tzibur? Or right? Is it the minyan or is it the shul? Okay. So it seems very confusing here. Okay, in the Rambam. Okay. Look at the Tur here. The Tur says that a person should only daven in a shul with a minyan. Right, so he definitely says that praying in a shul is what's meant by davening in a tzibur. He doesn't separate between the two, right? I would question whether, according to the Tur, if you daven outside of a shul with a minyan, if that's really considered tefillah b'tzibur according to the Tur. As strange as that sounds,
you can reverse it if I daven in a shul without a minyan.
Now I know who didn't listen to the introductory shiur. That's number 21 here, right? This is the Beis Yosef. Okay, so it's worse than last week. Last week, only Scott was the only one that listened to it because there was no audio, and Scott was the only one that wrote to me about it. Okay, so the Beis Yosef says like this. He says, "Lo yispal beis knesses simat tzibur. Damar Rabbi Yochanan ein tfilas shel adam nishmas. The parakama de brachos mefarash Rabbeinu the beis knesses kamor hainu imat tzibur umashma dvarav." So see, comes from the Torah's words. Shim eino mispal imat tzibur. If you're not davening with a minyan, lo shani lon bein bispal beis knesses bispal bais acher. It doesn't make a difference if you're davening in a shul or not. Aval Rabbi Yonah, he disagrees. Kasav b'shem hagonim shaf mispalim. Even if there's no minyan, yesh lo adam mispal beis knesses. You should still go to shul. I wake up at 9:00, right? And minyan, there's no late minyan, but the shul's open, so I should go to the shul and I should still daven. Because it's for the tefillah tzibur. What does that mean, right? Okay, so right, so why would davening in a shul without a minyan even be considered tefillah b'tzibur, right? What does that make sense, right? So right, I'm davening in an empty, right? Okay, and then why does the Beis Yosef say there's no difference if you daven in a shul or a house if there's no minyan, right? Why doesn't he see a value in davening in a shul alone? Right? Why doesn't the Beis Yosef in the beginning, right? His first, he starts off. Okay. According to the Gonim, right? So this is going to be similar to one of the other questions we asked, but the benefit of praying in a tzibbur is that it's an eis ratzon, right? Let's remember that, right? That davening with a tzibbur is an eis ratzon. So how does davening in a shul right, create an ace ratzon just as tefillah b'tzibbur does. Right? If I daven in a shul alone without a minyan, how is that an ace ratzon? Right? Just because it's kavua miyuchad letefillah b'tzibbur. Okay. The our next verse should be the ritva here. Amar agonim shafil kishein adam holech lebeis knesses yesh lo lispal b'shashat mispal kal. Right. So here's another, right, a third permutation of this. That if a person isn't going to go to shul, right, so he's at home, he can't go to shul. Corona, can't go to shul, right? But there are other crazy people davening in shul, right? So, but he's not going to go. So now the shul has its regular minyanim set. So what time should he daven? He should ideally daven by himself in his house at the same time that the tzibbur is davening. How is that an Eis Ratzon? Right? So the minyan in shul is at 7:30. I daven in my house at 7:30. I don't have a minyan in my house. My house is not a shul, but yet somehow now it's still an Eis Ratzon, and that's the best time to daven. So how's that work? Okay. So let's look at what Rabbi Zucker here says in this source in 23. Misod, sorry? Oh, I said so. Okay. Misod zeh kol chelek mitoch b'nei Yisrael sheyesh lahem eichos zu she'etzem hagdarasam kekvutza ba meha demespases yachad lemoritz lematara mishutefes shel yidiyas Hashem. Okay. Says Rabbi Zucker as follows. He says that when you have a tzibbur getting together to do a mitzvah, right? Remember, that's what we had said before. They are considered a joint venture coming together to understand God. That's what's happening, right? They're no longer looked at 10 individuals. They're no longer looked at just a group, and they're not looked at a group as just a group of people who are praying. They are now coming to be what's called Doresh Idiyas Hashem. They're coming to search out the knowledge of God. Okay, they're not searching out the knowledge of God is not a purely intellectual endeavor of study. Okay, right? So you see that by Avram Avinu, right, in Chumash, right? So this is my own idea. I don't want you to think this is Rabbi Zucker's idea. But you see that Avram Avinu would go and Yaakov Avinu would go and they would build a Mizbeach. And it says they would call out for Hashem. And then all you see the Rishonim, they're saying that they were teaching Idiyas Hashem, right? That was the Idiyas Hashem. But they weren't like giving classes. Right? It was just this idea of people coming together at the Mizbeach. That's a group coming for Yidiyas Hashem. When a group comes for Yidiyas Hashem, yesh lahem hashgacha pratis miyuchedes. They have a special divine providence that comes upon that group. Tfilas tzibbur, his asvus zu lahamritz l'martara mishutefes shel Yidiyas Hashem. Tfilas tzibbur is this gathering that's special and unique for Yidiyas Hashem. Going back to that pasuk that we remembered as God as our rock and gives us hope. Now something else happens when the group comes together, right? So when the group is, imagine just if we put like imagery to this, when the group is coming together and we're all walking at 7:29 and minyan starts at 7:30 and we're all walking into shul together, we're as a group coming together for Yidiyas Hashem. But once we start activating that search for Yidiyas Hashem, once we start davening together, then we accomplish something else. Then we achieve an ikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, that I'm sanctified among b'nei Yisrael. Kanhu pirsum dasa emes, right? And that why? Because I'm publicizing, right? I'm publicizing. Das emes means like the true belief system. Okay, it's the true belief system. In modern Hebrew, dat is like is a religious person is dati. Right, that is religion, right? So it's what I'm doing is I'm explaining the true belief system of the world. When people come together for Yidiyas Hashem, now there's a greater das emes. There's a truth. There's a greater pirsum of the true religion. Okay, so and that's the whole idea of the kedusha, of kiddush Hashem and being mefarsem kiddush Hashem. Okay,
and this line of reasoning holds even though certainly nowadays when we come to shul to daven, no one has any goal of Yidiyat Hashem of doing that. It's accomplished anyway.
Well, I mean, no, because you're saying that they don't recognize the fact that that's what they're doing. right? I'm coming.
Right.
When you ask the average person why they're coming to shul, it's I have a bunch of needs. I have a bunch of things I need to ask for, and that's why I'm coming. Right? I'm coming to. I have a bunch of things that I have complaints against God, I have requests of God, I have praise of God I want to do. But that is Yedias Hashem. Just because they don't recognize the fact that that's Yedias Hashem, that is Yedias Hashem, right? If I have a bunch of students that are coming into a math class, right, and if you'd ask them, what are you trying to do here, right? What's your goal? They're gonna say, I'm trying to get into college. Right, that's my goal here. I gotta get good grades. So I can get into college, right? Or in college, I gotta get a good job. But you are studying math. You might not care about the math. You might not care that you're increasing the knowledge of math in the world. That might not be, but that is what you're involved in. Just might not be your particular individual goal. But that's not the point. The point is that the group is coming together for Yedias Hashem. It doesn't matter what their intentions are when they do so. That is what they're doing.
But for those who hold that tefillah without kavana doesn't count, and you have to do it again, and I believe Rambam is in that, holds like that, but then basically pulls back and says nobody's going to have enough kavana, so we give them kind of.
No, the Rambam never pulls back. But when the Rambam talks about kavana, he's not talking about this kavana. He's talking about either knowing what the words mean or the fact that you're standing in front of God. This would be fine according to the Rambam if I thought that I was coming with a to-do list and a wish list in front of God. He would say, you don't understand what you're really doing, but that doesn't mean you're not yotzei your tefillah.
Right, you might be yotzei tefillah, you might be yotzei tefillah, but are you yotzei like knowledge of God or pursuing knowledge of God?
Yeah, because that's what it is. Whether you like it or not, that's what it is. Right? And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you recognize the greatness of what you're doing or not. That is what you're involved in. You might not recognize that this action that you're doing is accomplishing something much greater, but it is.
So using your example of math, just because I'm learning math, what if I'm not learning math? What if I get an F in the class?
So if you don't daven, so that's a good question. What would the right? So the Rambam would hold, by the way, it's a good question. I mean, this is a purely halachic question. The Rambam would hold that if somebody's not yotzei tefillah, right? Because they didn't recognize, let's say one of the conditions the Rambam has is that the entire time you're standing in front of God, again, it's not halacha l'maisa, so just so everybody should recognize it's not practical. But according to the Rambam, if you prayed the whole time and you were thinking about a basketball game and you weren't thinking the fact that you're in front of God, you didn't daven. You have to repeat your Shemona Esrei. So if there's only 10 people there, that guy didn't daven. He was doing the shuckling, but he didn't daven,
But you're
100%.
still part of the minyan and you're still part of the tzibbur. You're doing everything except your own personal accomplishment of the mitzvah.
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. It's a good halachic question. It's no one's going to deal with it practically because it doesn't matter because we don't hold this way. So you're not going to be able to find anyone that really, you have to find something according to the Rambam. What would he say? The Rambam doesn't address it. So it's all speculation at that point. And because we don't hold the Lamaisa, it doesn't really make a difference. The question would be if, no, it doesn't matter. Okay, we can go through a million permutations. It's not my area. I don't know. Okay, so let's try to understand what this Eis Ratzon is and how Tefila b'tzibur works. What's the nature of Tefila b'tzibur? Let's get a svara going here, and then with the svara, hopefully we'll answer our questions here. So I think that an Eis Ratzon is describing a time period where a person earns hashgacha pratis. A person earns specific divine providence. And therefore, his tefillos will be answered because of that. Okay. Now, what brings this on? So it's a tzibbur of Jews gathered for Yedias Hashem. Okay, and why is that so important? Why does that bring hashgacha pratis? Because that accomplishes kiddush Hashem. Okay, and prayer with a tzibbur is what fulfills those qualifications. Okay, so let me say it one more time. An Eis Ratzon is a time where a person earns hashgacha pratis, okay, and his tefillah is answered. That's what an Eis Ratzon is. Okay, so in other words, it's not like some time, like that we have. That's like you're trying to get to that time period, right? That's what we start off with, right? What brings up, but it's not. It's an Eis Ratzon is reflective after the fact, right? It's a consequence or a ramification of your actions. Okay, so it's when you earn hashgacha pratis. So that's when you know it was an Eis Ratzon. I mean, you're not going to know, but it's brought by a tzibbur of Jews coming together in order to have Yedias Hashem, right? That's what brings it on, because that tzibbur coming together for Yedias Hashem creates Kiddush Hashem, right? In what we called, what Rabbi Zucker called Pirsum Das Emes, right? The publicizing of the true belief system. Okay, and that's a time when you have Kiddush Hashem, and that's only a tzibbur does that, because only a tzibbur is going to be able to fulfill the idea of Pirsum. Okay, so our first question, and go through the questions. Our first question was the Idn Ezra and the Radak.
Can I just ask, what's this Pirsum of Dasa Emes? Where is that based in, and for what purpose? This is not like Pirsumei, Nisa or something.
It's like Pirsumei Nisa. It acts almost in the same way. Pirsum Nes doesn't require a minyan, right? It doesn't require a minyan right? We never have it, but there's a kiyum of Pirsum Nes with a minyan. We see that with Megillah. We see that on
right. So where do we see it in Tefila?
It's Tefila b'tzibur. That's what we're seeing.
But so you're defining that as a result of Pirsum?
That is,
or the other way around?
No, right. The question that we had to ask was, what does Tefila b'tzibur accomplish? What is it doing, right? So whenever you have 10 people, that's I could have gone through this. It would have taken a couple more sources, but when we have a minyan, the idea of a minyan is an Ada, right? That's an Ada. Right, so that's from a pasuk in the Torah. It's called an Ada, right? That's a congregation. That requires, the Gemara goes through, explains it's 10 people from Boaz and Ruth, right? And that's where we get Kiddush Hashem from. Takes place in front of 10 people, right? So, and that's the whole idea of Tefila b'tzibur is, right? The Tefila b'tzibur is creating that Ada, and that's where you get Pirsum Das Emes. Now you've publicized it, right? That's the idea, because it's in front of an Ada. By definition, what an Ada does, right? What an Ada does is it's mefarsing. I don't mean by a witness, right? But an Ada, what the congregation does is when everything is done in front of the congregation, it has a nature of Pirsum. You see that in the negative when a person violates Chil Hashem, right? So when a person violates Chil Hashem, so many cases where a person would gladly give up their life instead of, the other way, when a person would not have to give up their life, but they'd violate the sin. If it's in front of 10 people, because there's an idea of Pirsum there, then they do have to give up their life, even for an action that wouldn't be something you give up your life for.
So, Rabbi,
is it correct to say that I need to go to minyan in order to be Makai and Pirsum?
If I want to be Makai and Pirsum Das Emes, I have to be with a minyan. That's what it would seem like.
Right.
Because then we're going to get to questions of, then what's the point of davening in a shul by myself, right? Or davening at the same time that the tzibbur is davening, right? Then we're going to have to explain those things. But it would definitely seem that way, that let me put it this way. I'll put it better. The virtue of davening with a minyan is the fact that you're mefarsem Das Emes through the act of Kiddush Hashem, through the act of searching for Yedias Hashem.
So, Rabbi, maybe beyond the scope of this shiur, but from either from a practical or halacha l'maseh, shouldn't, like, Pirsum should be with a minyan, the minimum is 10, but shouldn't we aspire to have the largest minyan possible?
There's an idea of that. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that says B'rov Am Hadras Melech, that right, and that would be the idea, that the more people you have, the better it is. 100%. Yeah. For sure, right? But we're Jews and we can't do them. Okay,
right.
So
I'm just thinking about my community, and it just doesn't happen like that.
Right, that's not right. So it's not just yours. Okay, so right, so I got 15 shuls in my community, and they're building another one now. So they start today. Okay, so right, so you have, but I should say though, I don't want to be mostly laws in my community. In my community, there truly is no shul that's big enough. You know, you could say, why don't you just build one building that was big enough, but they didn't. So now we're just building smaller and smaller shuls all over the place, you know? Okay, but in any case, that's the reality. Okay, so the Idn Ezra and the Radak, right, had seemed to say that, this is our question, that an Eis Ratzon is a time where tefillos are answered, right? And Rashi said it seems that Eis Ratzon is a time when the Jewish people are in God's favor. So now we understand that what an Eis Ratzon really is, it's when we earn specific divine providence. That's what it is, right? That's and then his tefillos are answered. It's not all the thoughts that we had beforehand of what it is. Okay. How is the Eitz Ratzon the time the congregation is praying, right? So it's brought by, now you understand, right? It's brought by a tzibbur of Jews gathering to perform Yedias Hashem, right? Praying with a tzibbur fulfills those obligations, right? The qualifications, excuse me, right? That's the idea. Okay. Now, is there a difference between accepting prayer and despising prayer, right? Remember, we saw that twice. We saw that in the Gemara. We saw the Rambam copies the language. So accepting prayer, right, needs to be earned, okay? But God despising prayer isn't just us not being answered, right? It's a rejection of our prayer. In other words, there could be three responses to our prayer. Yes, accepting what we ask for, right? Just like we're not going to do it, right? Just listen to, but not, and then there's the rejection of our prayers, okay? A tzibbur might have done something so heinous that it deserves to have its prayers rejected, right? But because the tzibbur is coming together for this act of Yedias Hashem, which will then create the Kiddush Hashem, right? So therefore, their tefilos will still be answered, even though they're a group of chatayim who knows, God knows what they were doing the night before. Right? So it's like the whole tzibbur gathered together to create a pogrom against their fellow Jews. But the next morning, we had this. I asked my life in Milasar Tzion, we had this. We had the mafia. The mafia of Milasar Tzion used to go to minyan every morning. Right? So, so these guys, it's really, I'm dead serious. They would go, there'd be a minyan every single morning. So you look at them and you're like, this is a disconnect. So they would turn to you and be like, no, tefillah never rejected. Tzibbur was never rejected. We make sure to be a minyan every morning. Right, so that's the idea. Okay. Okay. So now,
can we have a share on that?
Yeah, it's a story now. Share. Okay, so if an Asa,
is it okay to ask, why do I need the tzibbur or a minyan or a Beit Knesset for Hashem to give me His, hashgacha pratis? Why can't that be accomplished without the tzibbur?
It can, but it's not guaranteed. That's the idea. It's not that somebody that davens by themselves in their house at a different time than the tzibbur is davening is by definition not going to have hashgacha pratis, but then it's completely dependent on your merit. Here, you don't have that idea of a tzibbur gathering together for Yedias Hashem, and then what are you lacking? You're lacking the Kiddush Hashem. So you're rolling the dice on assuming that without the Kiddush Hashem, the tefillah is almost like, to use a bad language, but it's almost like powered. It's brought up, and like raised up by the Kiddush Hashem aspect, right? There's an extra merit. When I daven by myself, I don't have that. Okay. Okay. So now we know what brings the Eitz Ratzon on. It's this Kiddush Hashem aspect. Okay. Okay.
So sorry, Rabbi. So during Corona, do you think that we've lost that ability, or does the framework of protecting life is in and of itself like a Kiddush Hashem, and therefore?
Well, it's not the same thing, right? But I would say, right, you don't have the Kiddush Hashem. I'd say you're lacking. But the halachic process would demand that you not fulfill Kiddush Hashem, but you are still lacking Kiddush Hashem. It's not, we shouldn't think that without davening the minyan that we're still, the question would be the other way. The question would be is if it was like mamish usher to daven with a minyan. You have like 10 people who are like Corona positive, like they've got Corona, and then there's like one guy there who doesn't. And then 9 guys get together with the one guy that doesn't, and the guy's like 85 and he's got like health issues, and like basically every minyan may sharm, and like, so they're all standing around there. And now the question is, so at the moment that the tzibbur is doing Kiddush Hashem, they're also like murdering somebody. So that's I think the better way of asking your question. Okay.
No, I think also another aspect of that would be by the fact that it's almost like a mitzvah haba ba'avera, the Kiddush Hashem all of a sudden disintegrates.
I don't know.
They don't have that aspect
It's
anymore.
a different story. I understand what you're saying. It makes sense. I just don't know if it's true. I've never thought about it. I don't know. It definitely makes sense. What you're saying makes 100% sense, right? It definitely seems like it would be logical. Okay, so we asked, what does sincerity have to do with prayer, right? So sincerity is a merit, right? that could earn your tefillah being answered. Okay. Okay, and then a lack of sincerity would be a lack of merit, right? So that's why that's what we talk about the individual praying. Okay, so is there an obligation now to daven with a tzibbur? When the Rambam said that you have to daven, a person must daven with a minyan, right? So is that a mitzvah according to the Rambam? Do you have to do that? So a chiyuv in tefillah is something that's necessary for the tefillah to be mekayim, right? To be mekayim the mitzvahs of tefillah. Tefillah with tzibbur is not necessary to be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillah, right? So I don't think according to the Rambam it would be a chiyuv. But I think according to the Rambam, what the Rambam is saying is that the whole goal of tefillah is to create that ritzui, that ace ratzon, right? So it only makes sense that you would go to davening. I think that's what the Rambam is saying when he says, right? If the goal of davening is to create the Eis Ratzon, and the Eis Ratzon is primarily created by the Kiddush Hashem, then you would have to, then it would make sense to go ahead and do that. Okay. So how do we, I'm just running out of time here. So how do we get to the idea that tefillah b'tzibur in a shul, right? So it depends on which one or both qualifies as an act that reflects Yedias Hashem, right? That brings a Kiddush Hashem. Okay, the value of a shul, what's the value of a shul, of a Beit Knesset? Is that it's a place set aside for tefillah b'tzibur, right? That's the value, right? Meaning it's a place set aside for Kiddush Hashem, right? So when you pray in a place that's set aside for Kiddush Hashem, so what you're doing is you're aligning yourself with the idea of Kiddush Hashem. I'm not able to accomplish the Kiddush Hashem, but I'm showing I'm demonstrating that I want to be aligned with this idea of Kiddush Hashem, and that itself is meritorious in terms of getting to the Eis Ratzon. Okay, so prayers in a shul, right? That's the source of the debate. The Torah maintains that that is the actual tefillah b'tzibur, okay, because it's the place of Kiddush Hashem. But the Rambam would hold it's not actual tefillah b'tzibur to daven in a shul by yourself, right? But the person of praying associates himself with tefillah b'tzibur. The Rambam holds that the shul is the makom hatzibur, so he's associating with it. So in the place of tefillah b'tzibur where he can't accomplish tefillah b'tzibur, at least he's associating with the tefillah b'tzibur, and that comes close to the Eis Ratzon, and that's what he's showing in his tefillah, that he thinks that that's important. Okay, right? So now the Beis Yosef, right, doesn't hold. Right, the Beis Yosef rejects this notion of davening in a shul alone because he rejects the notion of this whole idea of a Beis Knesset as a place of tefillah b'tzibur. He doesn't hold of that idea. Okay, and then lastly, right, by davening during the time of tefillah b'tzibur, right, so this idea of the ritva, that if I can't be in a shul and I can't be with a minyan in my house, I'm going to daven in my house by myself. What's the best time of davening? So the best time is when the tzibur is davening, because again, it's the same idea. I'm aligning myself with this idea of the Eis Ratzon, of the Pirsum Das, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to align myself with this idea of the tzibur coming to Yedias Hashem. So as much as possible, I should try to connect myself to that. Ideally, what's the best way? Being in the makom at the time with the tzibur. If I can't accomplish that, then what's the best thing to do? Be at least in the makom of the tzibur. If I can't do that, then I at least should pray at the time that the tzibur is gathering for Yedias Hashem, because I'm aligning myself with that time.
And Lamasa, which is better, to be in a shul davening alone or at home at the time of the minyan?
I think we say in the shul, but I don't know for sure. I have to look that up. I don't know. I have to see that. Okay, that's the shiur. So Idn Ezra, next week we'll do more of the chiyuv of tefillah b'tzibur. Is there an obligation down in tefillah b'tzibur? We'll look at that. A little more practical halacha, but we'll look at that and see the svaras there. Okay, have a good week, everybody.
Thank you
Watch
for the
video
change
this week.
Thank you for the time change.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's obviously more people coming, so it's good. Okay, call to everybody.
Take care.
Bye.